The cold blue light of distant stars filtered through the viewport as Commander Jack Reynolds stared out at the vast emptiness of space. His transport ship was minutes away from docking at Sentinel Station, and his stomach twisted with both excitement and dread. "Commander, we're starting final approach procedures," said the pilot over the intercom. "Please prepare for docking." Jack nodded to himself and gathered his few belongings. After 20 years of flying combat missions for the Galactic Alliance, he traveled light. One duffel bag contained everything he owned: some clothes, a few paper books, and a small metal box with photos of friends who hadn't made it back from battle. The transport shuddered as it connected with Sentinel Station's docking bay. Jack felt the familiar sensation of artificial gravity adjusting as the airlock sealed. When the doors finally opened, he stepped onto the station that would be his new home. Sentinel Station had once been the pride of the Alliance fleet. Now, it looked tired and worn, much like the war itself. The hallways that should have bustled with activity were nearly empty. The few crew members he passed walked with slumped shoulders and tired eyes. A young officer approached, her uniform crisp, despite the general atmosphere of defeat. "Commander Reynolds, I'm Lieutenant Pike. Admiral Grant asked me to escort you to the briefing room." Jack followed her through the maze of corridors. "How bad is it out here, Lieutenant? The reports don't tell the whole story." Pike's steps faltered briefly. "We lost 2 more squadrons last month. The Dominion ships, they're faster, more advanced. Our pilots fight well, but..." She didn't need to finish. Jack had heard this story too many times. The briefing room was small and packed with officers when they arrived. At the head of the table sat Admiral Grant, a stern woman with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much war. "Reynolds," she said, not bothering to stand. "Welcome to the last stand of the Alliance." The room fell silent. Jack placed his bag on the floor and straightened to his full height. "With respect, Admiral, if I thought this was our last stand, I wouldn't have accepted the assignment." A few quiet chuckles broke the tension. Grant's expression didn't change, but something sparked in her eyes. Perhaps a glimmer of hope. "You've been sent here because your methods get results," she said. "Unorthodox, dangerous, and completely against protocol, but results nonetheless. I need that now more than ever." Jack nodded. "When do I meet my squadron?" "Tomorrow," Grant replied. "Tonight you need to understand what we're facing." She activated the holographic display in the center of the table. The blue light illuminated faces around the room as a 3D model of their sector appeared. "The Dominion has established bases here, here, and here," she said, pointing to 3 locations surrounding Sentinel Station. "Intelligence suggests they're planning something big, a final push that could break through to the core human worlds. Their ships are faster, their weapons more powerful, and their targeting systems are beyond anything we've developed," added a tall, thin man at the end of the table. "I'm Colonel West, head of strategic operations. The simple truth is, Commander, we're outmatched." Jack studied the hologram carefully. "Maybe in technology," he admitted, "but there's one thing the Dominion has never understood about humans." "And?" "What's that?" asked Grant. "We're stubborn. We break rules. We do things that make no logical sense." Jack pointed to the display. "The Dominion relies on perfect logic and predictable patterns. That's their weakness." West scoffed. "We've lost 1,000 pilots trying to outmaneuver Dominion targeting systems. They predict every move." "Because we've been flying like we're supposed to," Jack countered. "By the book. By the laws of physics and optimal flight patterns." He looked around the room, meeting each pair of eyes. "What if we stop doing that?" The room erupted in argument exactly as Jack expected. After letting it continue for a minute, Admiral Grant raised her hand for silence. "That's why he's here," she said simply. "Because nothing else is working." The meeting ended shortly after, with Jack assigned quarters and told to report to Hangar Bay 3 the following morning. As he walked with Lieutenant Pike to his room, he could feel the weight of expectation on his shoulders. "Is it true?" Pike asked suddenly. "The stories about how you took down a Dominion destroyer with just 3 fighters at the Battle of Orion's Belt?" Jack smiled slightly. 4 fighters. and we got lucky. That's not what the reports say. They say you flew a pattern that shouldn't have been possible, that you broke formation and did something no pilot training program would ever teach. They stopped outside his quarters. Jack considered her words carefully before answering. Lieutenant, do you know why humans still pilot fighters when AI could do it more efficiently? She shook her head. Because sometimes the winning move isn't the logical one. It's the one no one sees coming. He picked up his bag. Get some rest. Tomorrow we start changing how this war is fought. Morning came too quickly. Jack made his way to Hangar Bay 3 after a night of studying battle reports and Dominion ship specifications. What he found was a squadron in name only. 12 pilots with good records but broken spirits. They stood at attention when he entered, a mix of veterans and young recruits. Jack walked slowly down the line, looking each one in the eye. At ease, he said finally. My name is Commander Jack Reynolds. As of today, you're all part of what we're calling Chaos Squadron. He saw confusion on their faces. An appropriate name because chaos is exactly what we're going to bring to the Dominion. A burly pilot with a thick beard stepped forward. With all due respect, sir, we've tried everything against their ships. Their targeting computers predict every move we make. Pilot? Miller, sir? Tom Miller. Well, Miller, that's because we've been making moves they can predict. Jack turned and walked to a nearby console, pulling up footage of a recent battle. Look here. Every Dominion weapon fires exactly where our ships are going to be, not where they are. They're using advanced algorithms to predict flight paths. A younger pilot spoke up. So we're already dead before we move. How do we fight that? Jack smiled. By breaking the rules of engagement. By flying in ways that make no sense. The Dominion builds their strategy on the assumption that we'll make optimal choices. What if we don't? He looked around at their skeptical faces. Today we start training differently. We're going to rewrite every flight pattern you've ever learned. We're going to move in ways that defy conventional tactics. Jack's voice grew stronger with each word. And when we're done, we're going to show the Dominion that they may understand physics and mathematics, but they don't understand humans. For the first time since he'd arrived at Sentinel Station, Jack saw something besides defeat in the eyes looking back at him. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was a start. Again! Jack shouted as the simulation ended. The pilots of Chaos Squadron groaned, sweat dripping from their foreheads despite the cool air of the training room. 2 weeks had passed since Jack's arrival at Sentinel Station. For 14 straight days he had pushed his squadron harder than any of them thought possible. The simulator pods hummed as they reset for another run. Sir, said Miller, wiping his face with a towel. We've been at this for 6 hours. The same simulation over and over. What exactly are we trying to accomplish? Jack walked to the center of the room where a holographic display showed the results of their last run, 12 ships against a simulated Dominion patrol. And once again half the squadron had been destroyed. What do you see? Jack asked, pointing to the flight paths of their vessels compared to the enemy's. The pilots gathered around, tired and frustrated. A young woman named Alex Reed spoke up first. They're still predicting us, even when we try random maneuvers. Exactly. Jack nodded. But look closer at the targeting data. He zoomed in on one of the simulated Dominion vessels. Oh! See that? There's a pattern to how their weapons track. Reed leaned in. They're not firing at where we are or even where we're going to be. They're firing at where we should be if we were flying optimal paths. Jack smiled. For the first time, someone else was seeing what he had noticed for years. Their entire combat system is built on the assumption that we'll fly in ways that make mathematical sense, that we'll follow the laws of physics and the rules of proper space combat. He switched the display to show footage from real battles. I've been studying these encounters for months. The Dominion doesn't just have better technology, they have a fundamental philosophy. Their entire society values order, efficiency, perfection. It extends to how they fight. Miller scratched his beard. So what? We can't outrun physics. No, Jack agreed. But we can use physics in ways they don't expect. He pulled up a new simulation. Look at this. When a Dominion targeting system locks onto a ship, it creates a prediction cone, all possible efficient paths the target might take. The display showed a cone-shaped projection extending from a human fighter. But what if we deliberately fly outside that cone? Jack continued. What if we do something so seemingly stupid, so inefficient that their system doesn't even consider it a possibility? The room fell silent as his words sank in. You want us to fly badly? On purpose? Reed asked incredulously. I want you to fly human, Jack corrected. Unpredictable, inefficient when needed, making choices based on instinct rather than calculation. He switched off the display. That's enough for today. Rest up. Tomorrow we try something new. Later that night, Jack sat alone in his quarters reviewing battle footage for the 100th time. A knock at his door interrupted his concentration. Enter, he called. Lieutenant Pike stepped in, carrying a data pad. Commander Admiral Grant asked me to deliver the latest intelligence reports. Jack gestured to an empty chair. Any news worth sharing? Pike sat down with a sigh. Nothing good. The Dominion is moving more ships to this sector. At their current pace, they could launch a major offensive within 2 weeks. Jack took the datapad and scrolled through the information. We're not ready, he muttered. Sir? Pike hesitated. There are rumors about what you're doing with Chaos Squadron. Some of the other officers think you're wasting time on impossible theories. Jack looked up from the pad. And what do you think, Lieutenant? I think, she paused, choosing her words carefully. I think we need something impossible right now. Jack smiled slightly. Then maybe you can help me with something. He turned his screen toward her. I've been trying to get access to the engine control systems for our fighters. The safety protocols are too restrictive for what I have in mind. Pike's eyes widened. You want to modify the engines? That would require authorization from engineering, from Dr. Marcus himself. Then introduce me to Dr. Marcus. The following morning, Jack stood in the main engineering bay with a small, nervous-looking man who didn't seem pleased to see him. Absolutely not, Dr. Marcus said, pushing his glasses up his nose. The safety protocols exist for a reason, Commander. Remove them and your pilots could tear their ships apart with a wrong move. Jack leaned against a workbench. What if I told you those safety measures are exactly what the Dominion is counting on? Their entire combat strategy assumes we won't do certain things because they're too dangerous or inefficient. Marcus shook his head. Physics doesn't care about combat strategy. Stress a hull beyond its tolerances and it breaks. Simple as that. I'm not suggesting we ignore physics, Jack replied. I'm suggesting we use it differently. Your engines are capable of more than the safety protocols allow. Yes, but Dr. Marcus, Jack interrupted. In 3 days I need to take my squadron out for a real test against a Dominion patrol. Before that happens, I need to know exactly what these ships can really do. Marcus stared at him for a long moment. You're serious about this? Dead serious. We're losing this war because we're playing by rules the Dominion wrote. It's time to change the game. The engineer sighed deeply. I can give you limited access, enough to push the engines 15% beyond current restrictions. Any more than that, and I can't guarantee the structural integrity of your fighters. Jack grinned. That's all I need. A 15% advantage they won't see coming. 2 days later, Chaos Squadron gathered in the hangar bay. Their fighters had been modified according to Jack's specifications, with Dr. Marcus personally overseeing the work, despite his continued objections. Listen up, Jack addressed his pilots. Today we run a real combat drill. The modifications to your engines will allow maneuvers that should be impossible according to standard flight protocols. Should be impossible? Miller repeated nervously. The key word is should, Jack replied with a smile. Your ships can now perform tight turns at speeds that would normally trigger automatic slowdown. You can briefly cut power during acceleration to create unpredictable momentum shifts. And most importantly, he paused for effect, you can now discharge your weapons during thrust vector changes. Reed raised an eyebrow. Why would we want to do that? It throws off targeting. Exactly. Jack nodded. It throws off our targeting, which means it will throw off theirs too. The energy discharge creates a brief field distortion that their systems can't account for. He walked down the line of fighters, inspecting each one. We're not trying to outshoot them or outrun them. We're trying to confuse them, to make them question their understanding of how combat works. And if this doesn't work? Asked a pilot named Jones. Then we'll die no differently than hundreds of pilots before us, Jack said bluntly. But if it does work, if we can prove my theory, we might just change the course of this war. As the pilots climbed into their cockpits, Admiral Grant entered the hangar. She walked directly to Jack, her face set in a grim expression. Commander, I've just received word. A Dominion patrol has been detected near the Archer's Point asteroid field. 3 cruisers heading this way. Jack felt a chill run down his spine. That's where we were planning our test run. It seems your test just became real, Grant said. I'm authorizing you to engage, but this is reconnaissance only. If my reports are correct, the Dominion has sent one of their best tacticians to lead this patrol, Commander Vex. Jack had heard the name. Vex was responsible for some of the Alliance's worst defeats. We'll be careful, he promised, though they both knew it was a lie. What he was planning was anything but careful. As Jack climbed into his own fighter, he felt a strange mixture of fear and excitement. For years, he had studied the Dominion, watching how they fought, looking for patterns and weaknesses that others had missed. Now it was time to test his theory against a real enemy. Chaos Squadron, he said into his comm as the hangar bay doors began to open. Remember what we've practiced. Do the unexpected. Break the rules. And no matter what happens, don't fly like a computer. Fly like a human. 12 fighters launched into the darkness of space, heading toward a confrontation that would either prove Jack's theory or end in disaster. The real test was about to begin. The hangar erupted with cheers as Chaos Squadron returned from their encounter with the Dominion patrol. What had begun as a risky test run had ended with something no one at Sentinel Station had seen in months. A victory, small but significant. Jack climbed out of his fighter, his flight suit drenched with sweat. The engagement had been brief, just under 15 minutes, but in that short time, his squadron had managed to disable 1 Dominion cruiser and force the others to retreat. Admiral Grant was waiting on the deck, her usually stern face showing the ghost of a smile. It seems your crazy theory has some merit, Commander. Jack nodded, too exhausted to celebrate. We caught them by surprise. That won't happen again. Explain to me exactly what happened out there, Grant said as they walked toward the debriefing room. We did everything wrong, tactically speaking, Jack replied. When their targeting systems locked on, we deliberately flew in ways that maximized our vulnerability instead of minimizing it. We accelerated when we should have slowed down. We turned toward weapons fire instead of away from it. And this worked because their systems are programmed to predict optimal responses. When we did the opposite, their targeting algorithms failed. Jack paused at the entrance to the debriefing room. But Commander Vex is no fool. He'll study what happened and adapt. Inside, the pilots of Chaos Squadron were already reviewing the combat footage, their earlier fatigue forgotten in the excitement of success. Look there. Reed was pointing at a specific moment in the battle. When Jones cut his engines mid-turn, the Dominion ship fired where he should have been, not where he actually went. Miller nodded excitedly. And when I discharged weapons during that vector change, their targeting systems completely lost lock for nearly 3 seconds. Jack watched them with pride. They were starting to understand, to truly see the potential of his approach. But he knew this was just the beginning. Enjoy this moment, he told them, because tomorrow, the real work starts. Word of their success spread quickly throughout Sentinel Station. By the next morning, pilots from other squadrons were approaching Jack, asking to join his training sessions. Admiral Grant, seeing the surge in morale, officially expanded Chaos Squadron to 3 full units, 36 pilots in total. But not everyone was convinced. Colonel West confronted Jack in the mess hall 3 days after their initial encounter. You got lucky, West said, setting his tray down across from Jack. And now Grant is reallocating resources based on one minor skirmish. Jack continued eating. Luck had nothing to do with it. We exploited a fundamental flaw in Dominion combat doctrine. Oh, flaw they'll correct, West countered. You think their engineers aren't already updating their targeting systems? Of course they are, Jack agreed, which is why we're developing new maneuvers every day. West leaned forward. You're giving these pilots false hope. Worse, you're teaching them to fly recklessly. When the Dominion comes in force, this chaos approach will get them all killed. Jack finally looked up from his meal. With respect, Colonel, following the established doctrine has already gotten hundreds of pilots killed. At least we're trying something new. As West stormed away, Lieutenant Pike slid into his vacant seat. You've made quite an impression, Commander. Half the station thinks you're a genius, the other half thinks you've lost your mind. Jack smiled slightly. And what do you think, Lieutenant? I think, she said, lowering her voice, that you should know there's a Dominion spy on this station. Jack's smile vanished. How sure are you? Security caught unusual transmission patterns last night. Someone sent encrypted data packets during our shift change when monitoring is at its lightest. Do we know what information was sent? Pike shook her head. Not yet, but given the timing. They're sending data about our new tactics, Jack finished. The thought. Which means we need to accelerate our training. Where's Dr. Marcus? Jack found the engineer in his workshop surrounded by holographic engine schematics. The small man barely looked up when Jack entered. Before you ask, Commander, I'm already working on the next set of modifications. Your 15% advantage won't be enough once the Dominion adapts. Jack studied the schematics. What are you proposing? Something risky, Marcus admitted, but potentially game-changing. He highlighted a specific part of the engine design. If we reconfigure the thrust vectoring system to permit momentary power surges during direction changes, we could achieve maneuverability that defies conventional physics. At what cost? Jack asked, knowing there had to be a catch. Marcus removed his glasses, rubbing tired eyes. Structural integrity. The stress on the hull would be enormous, and the pilots would experience G-forces at the very edge of human tolerance. How long to implement these changes? A week, maybe less if I pull engineers from other projects. Jack nodded. Do it, and keep it quiet. We have a security leak. For the next 5 days, Chaos Squadron trained constantly while Marcus and his team worked on the fighters. Jack pushed the pilots harder than ever, introducing increasingly erratic flight patterns and encouraging them to develop their own unpredictable maneuvers. The key, he explained during an evening briefing, is to never establish a pattern. The moment your movements become predictable even slightly, their systems will lock on. Reed raised her hand. Sir, we've been analyzing the combat footage. There's something strange about how the Dominion ships reacted when we used the engine. Cut during turns. She pulled up the relevant data. See here, for a fraction of a second their targeting systems actually overcompensated, firing far wide of our position. If we could somehow extend that moment of confusion. Jack studied the data with growing excitement. You're right. There's a vulnerability we haven't fully exploited yet. He turned to Miller. How are the simulator adjustments coming? Ready for testing, Miller replied. We've programmed it to replicate what we think will be their adapted targeting algorithms. Good. Tomorrow we start running scenarios with the new engine configurations. As the meeting ended, Admiral Grant entered with a grave expression. Commander, we've intercepted Dominion communications. They're sending Commander Vex significant reinforcements. A full battle group. ETA 8 days. The room fell silent. A battle group meant at least one dreadnought and multiple heavy cruisers. Far more than Chaos Squadron could handle, even with their new tactics. We're not ready, Jack admitted. We need more time to train more pilots. Time is the one thing we don't have, Grant replied. I'm authorizing round-the-clock training and pulling pilots from other stations. You have 1 week to prepare them for what's coming. After the Admiral left, Jack remained in the briefing room alone, staring at the holographic display showing the approaching Dominion forces. What had begun as a theory, a desperate attempt to find any advantage against a superior enemy, had now become the Alliance's last hope. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Dr. Marcus entered, looking even more tired than usual. "I've completed the first set of engine modifications," he said. "But there's something else you should see." He placed a small device on the table. It projected a schematic of the Dominion targeting system, more detailed than anything Jack had seen before. "Where did you get this?" Jack asked, amazed. Lieutenant Pike found it hidden in the station's database. Someone uploaded it 6 hours ago before attempting to transmit it out. Security blocked the transmission. Jack studied the schematic carefully. It confirmed everything he had theorized and more. The Dominion systems were even more predictive than he had realized, but that also meant they were more vulnerable to unpredictability. "This changes everything," he whispered. "With this, we can develop counters to their entire targeting approach." Marcus nodded. "I thought you'd say that. That's why I've already begun reconfiguring the simulator programs." As the engineer left, Jack felt a renewed sense of purpose. The spy had inadvertently given them the very information they needed most. Now the race was on, to train enough pilots in the new tactics before the Dominion arrived in force. The next days would determine not just the fate of Sentinel Station, but potentially the entire war. The real fight was about to begin. 7 days passed in a blur of simulator runs, engine modifications, and intense training. Jack pushed his pilots to their physical and mental limits, sometimes keeping them in the simulators for 18 hours straight. He knew it was brutal, but necessary. The Dominion wouldn't show mercy when they arrived, and arrive they did, a day earlier than expected. The alarm blared throughout Sentinel Station, jerking Jack from his first real sleep in days. He was on his feet and moving before his mind fully cleared, muscle memory taking over as he rushed toward the command center. Admiral Grant was already there, staring at the tactical display with grim determination. "They've just dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. 16 ships total, including a dreadnought." Jack studied the formation. It was classic Dominion tactics, a wedge formation with heavy cruisers at the front and the massive dreadnought protected in the rear. Commander Vex was playing it by the book, at least for now. "Status of our squadrons?" Jack asked. "Chaos Squadron is at full strength, 36 fighters ready for launch. The rest of our flight groups can provide an additional 48. Against a Dominion battle group, Grant didn't need to finish the thought. The odds were overwhelming. "We need to deploy immediately," Jack said, "before they get closer to the station." Grant nodded. "Launch all squadrons, but Jack," she added as he turned to leave, "this isn't just about testing your theories anymore. If we lose here, there's nothing between the Dominion and the core. Human worlds." "I know," Jack replied quietly. "We won't lose." In the hangar, pilots rushed to their fighters. The mood was tense but focused. These weren't the same defeated men and women Jack had met when he first arrived. They had tasted victory, seen proof that the seemingly invincible Dominion could be vulnerable. Jack found Reed checking her fighter systems. "How are the new modifications holding?" he asked. "Dr. Marcus says they'll give us about 10 minutes of enhanced maneuvering before the stress on the hulls becomes critical," she replied. "After that, structural integrity isn't guaranteed. 10 minutes might be all we need." Jack placed a hand on her shoulder. "Remember, stay unpredictable. The moment you fall into a pattern, you're vulnerable." Miller approached, his usual humor replaced by seriousness. "Commander, there's something you should know. We've been studying the Dominion fleet, the Dreadnought. It's the Inevitability, Vex's flagship." Jack felt a chill. The Inevitability was known throughout the Alliance as the deadliest ship in the Dominion fleet. It had been present at 3 major battles, all of them ending in devastating human defeats. "Then we target it specifically," Jack decided. "If we can damage or destroy their flagship, it might break their will to fight." As his pilots climbed into their cockpits, Jack took a moment to broadcast to all squadrons. "This is Commander Reynolds. Today we face the largest Dominion force ever encountered in this sector. They outnumber us, outgun us, and believe their victory is inevitable." He paused, letting his words sink in. "They're wrong. Because today we're not fighting their way. We're fighting our way, the human way. Unpredictable, adaptive, and completely illogical by their standards." He could almost feel the determination building across the comm. Chaos Squadron will lead the attack. Remember your training. Do the unexpected. Break the rules. And no matter what happens, make them remember that they picked a fight with humans. 84 fighters launched from Sentinel Station, forming up into their designated groups before accelerating toward the approaching Dominion fleet. Jack led Chaos Squadron at the front, his mind already racing through potential strategies. All units maintain communication discipline, he ordered. Use only the encrypted channels. If the Dominion has studied our previous engagement, they'll be monitoring for tactical chatter. The distance between the two forces closed rapidly. Jack watched as the Dominion ships adjusted their formation slightly, a sign that Commander Vex was aware of their approach and preparing to counter their tactics. They're adapting already, Reed observed on the private channel. Look at how their lead cruisers are spreading out to create overlapping firing arcs. Jack nodded to himself. Exactly what I expected. Vex is smart, but he's still thinking conventionally. He switched to the squadron channel. Chaos Squadron, execute pattern Sigma on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark. The fighters of Chaos Squadron suddenly split into 3 groups, each taking a completely different vector than would be tactically sound. Some accelerated directly toward the enemy. Others cut engines entirely, letting momentum carry them in an unpowered drift, while a third group executed wild spins and turns that seemed to have no purpose or pattern. For a moment, the Dominion ships hesitated, their targeting system struggling to prioritize among the chaotically moving fighters. Then the space between the forces erupted with weapons fire. The battle quickly devolved into a swirling, confusing melee. Standard alliance formations broke apart as each Chaos Squadron pilot implemented the unpredictable tactics they had trained for. The Dominion cruisers, used to facing organized attack patterns, struggled to maintain target locks. Jack pushed his fighter into a tight spiral, deliberately, flying through the debris field of a destroyed vessel, something no tactical manual would ever recommend. The debris provided random, unpredictable cover while also confusing enemy sensors. Group 3 status report, he called as he emerged from the field. We've disabled the weapons array on Cruiser 2, Miller responded, his voice tight with concentration. But they're adapting fast. Their targeting systems are starting to anticipate some of our maneuvers. Jack frowned. This was the moment he had warned about. The Dominion learning, adapting to their tactics. It was time for the next phase. All Chaos units implement wildcard maneuvers. Use the engine modifications now. Across the battlefield, the fighters of Chaos Squadron engaged their modified engines. The changes Dr. Marcus had made allowed for impossible bursts of speed and direction changes that no conventional craft could achieve, and no targeting system could predict. Jack felt his body strain against the G-forces as he executed a turn that should have torn his fighter apart. Warning lights flashed across his console as the hull integrity indicators dropped into the red zone. Commander? Dr. Marcus's voice came through on the emergency channel. The structural integrity of your fighters won't hold much longer under these conditions? Just a little more, Jack muttered, more to himself than in response. Through his viewport, he could see the massive form of the inevitability moving into attack position. The Dreadnought's main weapons were powering up, preparing to deliver devastating fire that could destroy multiple fighters with a single shot. It was now or never. Reed, Miller, Jones, form on me, Jack ordered. The rest of you continue harassing the cruisers. We're going for the Dreadnought. 4 fighters broke away from the main battle, accelerating toward the inevitability at maximum speed. The Dreadnought immediately oriented its main weapons toward them. Standard evasive pattern for 30 seconds, Jack instructed his small group. Make them think we're using conventional tactics. Then, on my mark, execute maximum wildcard. The fighters weaved and dodged in textbook evasive patterns as they approached. The inevitability's weapons tracked them easily, preparing to fire with deadly accuracy. Get ready, Jack said, watching the distance counter tick down. 3, 2, 1, now. In that instant, the 4 fighters did something that defied all combat logic. Instead of continuing to evade, they cut engines completely, fired thrusters in seemingly random patterns, and discharged their weapons while executing impromptu spins. The combined effect created a momentary energy field distortion that completely confused the dreadnought's targeting systems. The massive energy weapons of the inevitability fired and missed completely. "Now," Jack shouted. "Full thrust, direct approach." The four fighters surged forward in the wake of the dreadnought's failed attack, closing the distance before its weapons could recharge. They streaked along the massive hull, firing precision shots at key systems that the stolen schematics had identified as vulnerabilities. Jack's fighter shuddered violently as a defensive weapon grazed his wing. Warning alarms blared as his structural integrity dropped to critical levels. He ignored them, focusing entirely on his target, the dreadnought's main power coupling. "One shot," he whispered. "Just need one perfect shot." He fired. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a cascade of explosions erupted along the dreadnought's hull as the power coupling failed, triggering a chain reaction through connected systems. "All units, clear the dreadnought's vicinity," Jack ordered as he pulled away, his fighter protesting with every maneuver. The battle seemed to pause as both sides watched the mighty inevitability drift powerless, its lights flickering and weapons systems offline. For the first time in known history, a Dominion dreadnought had been neutralized by a handful of fighters. The impossible had happened, but the battle was far from over. The disabled dreadnought inevitability drifted silently against the backdrop of stars, its massive weapon systems offline and its running lights flickering weakly. Around it, the battle continued. But something fundamental had changed. The near-mythical flagship of Commander Vex, never before defeated, was now just another damaged vessel in space. Jack's fighter limped away from the dreadnought, warning lights flashing across his control panel. The stress of the wildcard maneuvers had pushed his ship's hull integrity to its breaking point. "All Chaos units, report status," he called over the comm. The responses came in quickly. 3 fighters lost, 11 with critical damage, but the rest still combat capable. Considering they were facing a Dominion battle group, the numbers were nothing short of miraculous. "Commander," Reed's voice came through, "the Dominion cruisers are regrouping. They're forming a defensive perimeter around the inevitability." Jack watched as the remaining Dominion vessels shifted position. Their previously perfect formation was now ragged and reactive. For the first time, they were fighting defensively rather than offensively. "They're protecting the dreadnought," Miller observed. "They don't know what to do without Vex directing the battle." Jack studied the tactical display. The Dominion still had 12 operational cruisers against their 80 remaining fighters. Under normal circumstances, those odds would still favor the Dominion heavily, but these weren't normal circumstances. "Admiral Grant," Jack called back to the station, "the Dominion force is off balance. If we press now, we might be able to force a full retreat." "Agreed," Grant replied. "All squadrons continue engagement. Focus on the cruisers closest to Sentinel Station." The battle resumed with renewed intensity. Human fighters darted between the massive Dominion vessels, using the chaotic tactics Jack had developed to confuse their targeting systems. But something unexpected was happening. The Dominion ships were beginning to adjust their firing patterns. "They're adapting again," Reed warned. "Their weapons are firing in broader spreads instead of precise targeting." Jack nodded grimly. It was inevitable. The Dominion might be rigid in their tactics, but they weren't stupid. If they couldn't predict exactly where a fighter would be, they would simply expand their firing zones to cover all possibilities. "Time for the next evolution," Jack said. All Chaos units switched to fusion patterns. The Chaos Squadron fighters immediately began operating in pairs, flying in perfectly mirrored patterns just long enough for Dominion targeting to lock on, then abruptly breaking in opposite, unpredictable directions. The effect was devastating. Dominion weapons would lock onto what appeared to be a predictable formation, only to find themselves firing at empty space as the fighters scattered in ways their algorithms couldn't anticipate. Jack guided his damaged fighter through the chaos, searching for a specific target. There, one of the Dominion communication cruisers, the vessels responsible for coordinating their fleet's movements. If they could disrupt the Dominion's ability to communicate, their advantage would grow exponentially. Miller, Jones, form on, Me, he ordered. We're taking out their comms. The three fighters converged on the communication cruiser, weaving through increasingly desperate defensive fire. Jack's ship shuddered as a glancing hit struck his already damaged wing. Structural. Integrity at 18%, his computer warned. Hull breach imminent. Just a little longer, Jack muttered, pushing the fighter beyond its design limits. They reached the cruiser, unleashing a barrage of weapons fire at its communication array. The delicate equipment exploded in a shower of debris and energy discharges. Immediately, the coordination between Dominion vessels became noticeably more erratic. What's happening on the Inevitability? Jack asked as they pulled away from the crippled cruiser. Energy readings are fluctuating, Reed reported. They appear to be attempting to restore main power. Jack made a quick decision. All units, focus fire on the remaining cruisers. I'm going back to the Dreadnought. Ignoring the protests of both his crew and his ship's computer, Jack steered his fighter back toward the massive Inevitability. If Vex managed to restore power, the tide of battle could turn again. As he approached, he noticed a smaller vessel detaching from the Dreadnought's hangar bay, an escape shuttle. Vex is running, he realized aloud. The Dominion commander was abandoning his flagship and his fleet. Something about this struck Jack as profoundly significant. The Dominion, with all their technological superiority and rigid adherence to perfect order, had never faced an enemy they couldn't predict. Now, confronted with human unpredictability, their legendary commander was fleeing rather than adapting. Jack targeted the escape shuttle, but hesitated. Destroying it would be tactically sound, eliminating a key Dominion leader, but allowing Vex to escape would send a different, perhaps more powerful message back to Dominion High Command. He made his choice, veering away from the shuttle and instead broadcasting on an open channel. Dominion vessels, this is Commander Jack Reynolds of the Galactic Alliance. Your flagship is disabled. Your commander has abandoned you. This battle is over. For several tense moments, nothing happened. Then, one by one, the Dominion cruisers began powering down their weapon systems. Not surrendering, the Dominion never surrendered, but withdrawing from battle. The cheers that erupted over the comm system were deafening as Alliance pilots realized what was happening. For the first time in the war, a Dominion battle group was retreating. Jack watched as the Dominion vessels gathered their damaged and began a coordinated withdrawal from the sector, leaving the drifting hulk of the Inevitability behind. His fighters' warning systems had moved from urgent to critical, but he barely noticed. The significance of what had just happened was still sinking in. All units return to Sentinel Station, Admiral Grant ordered, her voice steady despite the obvious emotion behind it. Well done, everyone, especially you, Chaos Squadron. The flight back to the station passed in a blur for Jack. His fighter was barely responding to controls now, the frame groaning with every minor adjustment. When he finally landed in the hangar bay, engineering teams had to cut him out of the cockpit because the standard mechanisms had failed. The celebration in the hangar was like nothing Jack had ever seen. Pilots and station crew embraced, laughed, cried. Admiral Grant was waiting as Jack climbed down from his shattered fighter, her usually stern face now open with amazement. You did it, she said simply. You actually did it. Jack shook his head. We all did it. Every pilot who was willing to try something new to break the rules of conventional combat. The Dominion will analyze everything that happened here, Grant warned. They'll develop new targeting systems, new counter-tactics. Let them try, Jack replied. That's the point they've never understood about humans. We don't follow patterns. We adapt, we improvise, we overcome. For every counter they develop, we'll find a new approach they haven't considered. In the days that followed, news of the battle spread throughout Alliance space. The recording of Chaos Squadron's tactics was transmitted to every flight school and military academy. What Jack had begun as a desperate theory had become the foundation for a new approach to space combat. 3 weeks after the battle, Jack stood in Admiral Grant's office as she showed him the latest intelligence reports. The Dominion has pulled back from all fronts, she said. They're consolidating their forces, apparently for a major strategic reassessment. They're trying to understand what happened, Jack observed, to figure out how to counter our unpredictability. Will they succeed? Jack smiled slightly. They might develop better systems, more adaptive targeting, but they'll never fully understand the human element, our creativity, our willingness to take risks that make no logical sense. And Commander Vex? According to our intelligence, he's been reassigned to their interior defense forces. Apparently, the Dominion doesn't look kindly on commanders who abandon their flagships. Grant nodded, then handed Jack a datapad. These are your new orders. Fleet Command is establishing a dedicated training program based on your tactics. They're calling it the Chaos Initiative. Jack took the pad, scanning the details. They want me to oversee the training of all Alliance fighter pilots? Not just fighters, Grant corrected. They're adapting your principles for capital ships as well. This is becoming the new standard for Alliance combat doctrine. As Jack left the Admiral's office, he found the pilots of the original Chaos Squadron waiting in the corridor. Reed, Miller, Jones, all of them standing at attention. At ease, he said with a smile. What's all this about? We heard about your new assignment, Reed replied. We wanted to know if you'd be taking your squadron with you. Jack looked at the faces of these pilots who had trusted him, who had been willing to fly in ways that defied all conventional wisdom. You're damn right I am, he said. After all, someone has to teach the rest of the Alliance how to fly like humans instead of computers. As they walked together through the station, Jack felt a profound sense of accomplishment. By embracing what made humans different, their unpredictability, their creativity, their willingness to take seemingly irrational risks, they had turned the tide of a war that had seemed unwinnable. One human pilot had indeed rewritten the laws of space combat, and in doing so had reminded both humanity and their enemies of a fundamental truth. Sometimes the most powerful advantage isn't superior technology or perfect efficiency, but simply being unpredictably, irrationally, brilliantly human. The great black emptiness of space stretched out before the horizon, Earth's most advanced exploration vessel. Captain Tom Miller stood on the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back as he gazed at the stars through the main view screen. 20 years in space had given him lines around his eyes and gray in his dark hair, but his sharp blue eyes were still full of wonder. Captain, we're picking up an unusual signal, said Lisa, the ship's communications officer. Her fingers moved quickly over her console. It's not matching any known pattern in our database. Miller nodded. Location? Coming from the edge of the Orion Nebula, sir, replied Marcus, the young navigator. About half a light year from our position. Interesting, Miller said. Change course to investigate standard approach protocols. The horizon turned gracefully, its engines humming as it moved toward the mysterious signal. Miller felt the familiar mix of excitement and caution that came with every new discovery. Humanity had been exploring space for nearly a century, establishing colonies on distant planets and moons, but they had yet to encounter intelligent alien life. Until today. Sir, visual contact, Marcus called out. The main screen flickered and then showed something that made everyone on the bridge fall silent. A massive ship hung in space, at least 5 times the size of the horizon. It was smooth and sleek, with a design unlike anything humans had built. It gleamed with a metallic purple sheen and strange blue lights pulsed along its hull. Are they transmitting? Miller asked, finding his voice. Lisa nodded. Yes, sir. The computer is trying to decode it. Lieutenant Alex Reed, the ship's tactical officer, spoke up from his station. I'm reading energy signatures unlike anything I've seen before, Captain. Their power output is extraordinary. Defensive posture, Miller ordered. Shields up, but weapons offline. We don't want to appear hostile. The tension on the bridge was thick enough to cut with a knife as they waited. Finally, the computer chimed. Translation matrix established, Lisa announced. They're requesting visual communication. Miller straightened his uniform. Accept the request. The screen changed to show an alien face. The creature had gray-blue skin with faint ridges along its forehead and cheeks. Its eyes were large and completely black, giving away nothing of what might be thinking. "I am Commander Zell of the Vorn Empire," the alien said, its mouth moving, strangely with the words. "You have entered territory claimed by our people." Miller stepped forward. "I am Captain Tom Miller of the Earth vessel Horizon. We are on a mission of peaceful exploration. We were unaware this region was claimed by anyone. We come with respect and friendship." The alien's expression seemed to shift into something that might have been amusement, though it was hard to tell. "Earth vessel," Zell repeated. "We have heard. Of your kind. Newly emerged from your planet, spreading like insects across the stars." The alien's voice was smooth, but held a hint of something cold. "Our empire has existed for 10,000 of your years." Miller maintained his diplomatic tone. "Then we have much to learn from you. We would welcome an exchange of knowledge and culture." "Perhaps," Zell replied. "Our sensors have scanned your vessel. Your technology is primitive." Reed tensed at his station, but Miller gave him a warning glance. "We are always eager to advance our understanding," Miller said carefully. "You will permit a delegation from our ship to board yours," Zell said. "It wasn't a request." Miller hesitated only briefly. "We would be honored to receive your delegation." After the communication ended, Reed approached Miller. "Captain, I don't like this. Their scans were incredibly invasive. They now know everything, about our systems, including our weapons." "And what did you learn about theirs?" Miller asked quietly. Reed's expression was grim. "Not nearly enough. Their hull is made of materials I can't identify. The energy readings suggest weapons far beyond our capabilities." Miller nodded. "Keep analyzing, find me something useful." 2 hours later, Miller stood in the Horizon's main docking bay alongside his senior officers. The Vorn shuttle had docked, and they were waiting to greet the alien delegation. The shuttle door opened with a soft hiss, revealing Commander Zell and 4 other Vorn. They were all tall and moved with a fluid grace that seemed almost unnatural. Each wore a close-fitting suit of a material that shimmered slightly in the light. "Welcome aboard the Horizon," Miller said with a small bow. Zell did not return the gesture. "Your ship is smaller than it appeared," he said, looking around with what seemed like disdain. "But efficient for our needs," Miller replied smoothly. "Would you like a tour?" "Yes," Zell said. "Show us your weapon systems." Miller exchanged a glance with Reed. "Of course. This way." As they walked through the ship, Miller noticed how the Vorn seemed to be scanning everything with small devices they carried. He made a mental note to have the ship's systems checked for any tampering after the visit. When they reached the weapons control room, Reed gave a basic overview of the Horizon's defensive capabilities. The ship was equipped with railguns, missile launchers, and a few energy weapons still in the testing phase. Zell made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You fire metal projectiles? Physical ammunition?" He turned to his companions and spoke, in their language which the translation matrix was still struggling to fully decode. The other Vorn made similar sounds. They were laughing. "Kinetic weapons have served us well," Reed said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Perhaps against other primitives," Zell replied. He raised his hand, and a hologram appeared above it, showing a Vorn ship surrounded by a glowing field. "Our vessels are protected by energy shields that can repel any physical object. Your weapons would be useless against us." To demonstrate, Zell nodded to one of his companions, who pressed something on his wrist device. A small bubble of energy formed in the air between them. Reed, at Miller's nod, fired a low-powered test shot from a sidearm. The energy bubble flashed, and the projectile fell harmlessly to the floor. "Impressive," Miller acknowledged, though he noticed Reed was watching the demonstration with intense focus rather than dismay. "This is but a fraction of our capabilities," Zell said. "The Vorn Empire has conquered 100 worlds. Some fought, none succeeded." Miller maintained his diplomatic smile, but his mind was racing. This was clearly no longer just a first contact situation. It was a threat assessment. "We hope to avoid any need for fighting," Miller said. "Earth seeks peaceful relations with all species. Peace, Sel repeated, as if the word amused him. Peace is for equals, Captain Miller. What we see here does not suggest equality. After the tour ended and the Vorn returned to their shuttle, Miller called an emergency meeting with his senior staff. Thoughts? He asked, looking around the table. They're preparing for something, Reed said immediately. That wasn't a diplomatic visit. It was reconnaissance. Agreed, said Dr. Park, the ship's science officer. They were cataloging our strengths and weaknesses. Miller turned to Reed. You seemed interested in their shield demonstration. A small smile appeared on Reed's face. Yes, sir. I was running sensor scans while they showed off. There's something there. Something they might not even realize. What? Miller leaned forward. Every time the shield blocked the projectile, there was a tiny power fluctuation, just for a millisecond. Reed's eyes gleamed with the excitement of discovery. The shield isn't constant. It cycles. There's a moment, just a moment, when it's down. Miller considered this information. Can we exploit that? I don't know yet, Reed admitted, but it's something they think we're too primitive to notice, and that might be our only advantage. Miller nodded and stood up. Send a coded message to Earth Command. First contact established with advanced species called the Vorn. Possible hostile intent. Request immediate instructions. He looked at each of his officers in turn. Until then, we remain diplomatic, but prepare for the worst. Outside the viewports of the horizon, the massive Vorn ship loomed, its blue lights pulsing like a heartbeat. The moment of peace was passing, and something new was beginning. 3 days had passed since the first meeting with the Vorn. The horizon remained in position, maintaining a respectful distance from the alien vessel, while Earth Command decided how to respond to this new potential threat. Captain Miller sat in his quarters, reviewing the data they had gathered. Sleep had become a luxury he could barely afford. A soft beep from his door interrupted his thoughts. Enter, he called. Lieutenant Reed walked in, holding a data tablet. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't been sleeping much either. You've found something, Miller said. It wasn't a question. Reed nodded and sat down across from his captain. I've been analyzing their shield technology non-stop. The fluctuation pattern is complex, but there's definitely a pattern. He handed Miller the tablet. Every 4.3 seconds, there's a gap of approximately 0.006 seconds, barely the blink of an eye. Miller studied the readings. Can we exploit such a small window? Maybe, if we could time our weapons to fire precisely during that gap. Reed's voice trailed off. But we'd need to develop a new targeting system. A chime from the ship's communication system interrupted them. Captain to the bridge, Lisa's voice announced. We're receiving a transmission from Earth Command. Miller and Reed exchanged glances before hurrying to the bridge. Admiral John Parker's face filled the main screen, his expression grim beneath his gray hair. Captain Miller, our analysts have reviewed your data on the Vorn. The diplomatic team has also studied the language and cultural markers you've provided. And, Miller asked. And we don't like what we're seeing, the Admiral replied. The Vorn Empire's communication patterns match those of previous conquering civilizations from Earth's history. Their peaceful overtures appear to be standard practice before they establish dominance. Miller felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. So this is a prelude to invasion. We believe so, Admiral Parker confirmed. We're mobilizing the fleet, but it will take time. For now, maintain diplomatic relations. While we prepare, we're sending you coordinates for a rendezvous with reinforcements. Yes, sir. There's one more thing, Miller added. Lieutenant Reed has discovered a potential weakness in their shield technology. The Admiral leaned forward. Explain. Reed stepped into view and quickly outlined his findings. When he finished, there was a moment of silence. This could be significant, Admiral Parker finally said. I'm forwarding this to our research division immediately. In the meantime, a Vorn delegation has requested a meeting with Earth's representatives. We're sending Ambassador Wilson to your location. Understood, sir, Miller said. As the communication ended, Marcus called out from his station. Captain, the Vorn ship is moving. Miller turned to the view screen. The massive alien vessel was indeed changing position, turning slowly to face away from them. What are they doing? Miller wondered aloud. Reed was already checking his sensors. Sir, they're opening some kind of portal. It's similar to our jump technology but more stable. They watched as 3 more Vorn ships emerged from the swirling portal. Each was smaller than Commander Zell's vessel but still impressive. They're bringing reinforcements, Miller said quietly. Get me Commander Zell. The Vorn commander's face appeared on screen moments later. Captain Miller, Zell greeted, his tone somehow both polite and dismissive. I trust you've noticed our additional ships arriving. I have, Miller replied evenly. May I ask the purpose of these reinforcements? Merely standard protocol, Zell said smoothly. When meeting new species, we prefer to have adequate resources available. For peaceful exchanges? Miller asked. Zell's black eyes seemed to glitter. Of course. Though I should inform you that we have scanned your system thoroughly. You have several resource-rich planets and moons that would be valuable. Additions to the Vorn Empire. Miller kept his expression neutral despite the clear threat. Those planets and moons are Earth colonies, Commander. They are not available for addition to any empire. Perhaps your leadership will see things differently when they arrive, Zell said. We understand a representative is coming to meet with us. Miller felt a chill at the realization that the Vorn had been monitoring their communications. Ambassador Wilson is coming to discuss peaceful relations between our peoples, he confirmed. Excellent. We look forward to these discussions. Zell's mouth formed what might have been a smile. In the meantime, would you care to see a demonstration of Vorn technology? A gesture of good faith. Miller glanced at Reed, who gave a subtle nod. Any information they could gather would be valuable. We would be honored, Miller replied. 2 hours later, Miller, Reed, and Dr. Park stood in the observation room of the horizon, watching as a small Vorn shuttle positioned itself in space. Between the human and alien vessels, they're preparing some kind of demonstration, Dr. Park said, adjusting her instruments. I'm recording everything. Commander Zell's voice came through the comm system. Captain Miller, we understand your weapons rely primarily on kinetic force, physical, projectiles moving at high speed. That's correct for many of our systems, Miller confirmed. Please observe, Zell replied. The Vorn shuttle deployed what appeared to be standard human missile drones, likely replicas they had created based on their scans of Earth technology. The drones moved into position, targeting the shuttle. They're going to attack their own shuttle? Reed asked, confused. The drones fired, launching missiles that streaked toward the Vorn craft. Just before impact, a shimmer of blue energy surrounded the shuttle. The missiles exploded against the shield, creating bright flashes but doing no apparent damage. As you can see, Zell's voice returned, your most powerful weapons are useless, against even our smallest vessels. Miller watched as the demonstration continued. The Vorn shuttle now deployed energy weapons, firing beams of purple light that easily destroyed the remaining drones. Our defensive and offensive capabilities are beyond your current technology, Zell continued. This is not meant as a threat, merely a demonstration of reality. Thank you for the demonstration, Miller replied diplomatically. It was most informative. After the communication ended, Miller turned to his officers. Thoughts? They're trying to intimidate us, Dr. Park said immediately. Reed was looking at his data readings with intense focus. Sir, I recorded the entire shield sequence. The fluctuation is consistent with my earlier findings. There's definitely a gap. Could we hit that gap with our current weapons? Miller asked. Reed shook his head. Not reliably. The timing would need to be precise to the millisecond, but his eyes lit up with an idea. What if we modified our targeting systems, created something specifically designed to exploit this weakness? How quickly could we develop such a system? Miller asked. With help from Earth's research division? Maybe a few weeks, Reed estimated. The real question is whether the Vorn know about this weakness themselves. If they did, they'd have fixed it, Dr. Park pointed out. The fact that the gap exists suggests they either don't know or don't consider it a vulnerability. Miller nodded slowly. Because no one has ever exploited it before. No one has ever had the chance to observe their shields closely enough. Or no one was primitive enough to still be using physical weapons, Reed added with a grim smile. Their mockery of our technology might be their downfall. A notification chimed on Miller's communicator. Ambassador Wilson's shuttle has entered our sector. We'll dock with them in 30 minutes. As they prepared to receive the Earth ambassador, Miller couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The Vorn weren't here for peaceful relations. They were sizing up Earth for conquest. Their only hope lay in the almost imperceptible flaw that Reed had discovered, a moment of weakness in an otherwise perfect defense. A split second when the mighty Vorn shields went down. A brief instant that might mean the difference between Earth's freedom and its subjugation. They just needed to find a way to exploit that moment before it passed forever. Ambassador Wilson was not what Captain Miller had expected. Instead of the stern diplomat he had imagined, Jack Wilson was a man in his late 30s with bright eyes and a quick smile. More surprisingly, he had brought with him a team of engineers, rather than diplomats. "Ambassador, welcome aboard the Horizon," Miller said as they shook hands in the docking bay. "Please call me Jack," Wilson replied. He gestured to the 4 people behind him. "And these aren't political advisors, they're the best weapons engineers Earth has to offer." Miller raised an eyebrow. "I wasn't informed of this." Jack lowered his voice. "Earth Command thought it best to maintain appearances. Officially, I'm here to negotiate. Unofficially." He glanced at the engineers. "We're here to turn Lieutenant Reed's discovery into a weapon." Miller nodded slowly. "I see Admiral Parker took Reed's findings seriously." "Very seriously," Jack confirmed. "The entire Earth defense network is being modified as we speak. But we need to test the theory in actual combat conditions." He handed Miller a data chip. "These are your new orders." In the ship's main conference room, Miller gathered his senior staff along with Jack and his team. The mood was tense as Miller outlined their new mission. "Earth Command believes war with the Vorn is inevitable," Miller explained. 4 more Vorn battle groups have been detected entering our solar system. They're positioning themselves near our major colonies. "They're preparing for invasion," Reed said grimly. Miller nodded. "While I meet with Commander Zell to negotiate, our real mission is to finish developing a weapon that can penetrate their shields." Jack stepped forward. "Based on Lieutenant Reed's data, we've designed a timing system that can detect the shield, fluctuation patterns, and calculate the precise moment to fire." He brought up a holographic display showing the new device. "We call it the Sync Module." "It looks simple," Dr. Park observed. "By design," one of Jack's engineers replied. "It needs to be easy to mass produce and install on all Earth vessels and defense platforms. The challenge," Jack continued, "is that each foreign ship has a slightly different shield pattern. The Sync Module needs to analyze it first, then adjust the weapon timing accordingly." "How long does the analysis take?" Reed asked. "About 30 seconds of continuous scanning," Jack replied, "during which we'd be vulnerable." Miller frowned. "So our ships would need to survive at least 30 seconds of Vorn attack before being able to fight back effectively." "That's the catch," Jack acknowledged. "We're hoping to install the first prototype on the Horizon today. With your permission, Captain." Miller looked around at his crew, then back to Jack. "Let's get to work." While the engineering teams worked to modify the Horizon's main weapons systems, Miller prepared for his meeting with Commander Zell. The Vorn leader had requested the meeting take place on his ship, a clear power move that Miller had little choice but to accept. "Remember," Jack said as Miller prepared to board the shuttle, "the goal is to keep them talking. The longer they believe diplomacy is an option, the more time we have to prepare." "I understand," Miller replied. "But what if they can detect the modifications we're making?" "The changes are minimal from an external scanning perspective," Jack assured him. "They're looking for energy weapons, not timing adjustments to existing systems." Miller nodded and boarded the shuttle. The interior of the Vorn command ship was even more impressive than Miller had imagined. Tall, sweeping corridors led to a vast chamber where Commander Zell waited, seated on what could only be described as a throne. "Captain Miller," Zell greeted, his dark eyes revealing nothing. "Where is your Ambassador Wilson?" "Preparing our proposal," Miller replied smoothly. "He sent me ahead to establish preliminary terms." Zell made a dismissive gesture. "There are no terms to discuss. The Vorn Empire has claimed your solar system. We offer you a choice: serve as a protectorate under our guidance or face elimination." Miller kept his expression neutral despite the bluntness of the threat. "Surely there's room for a more beneficial arrangement for both our peoples." "Both?" Zell seemed amused. "Captain, you fail to understand your position. Let me show you something." A large holographic display appeared in the center of the room, showing the Earth solar system. Red markers indicated Vorn fleet positions. "We have already surrounded your major colonies," Zell explained. "In 2 of your Earth days, we will begin our conquest. Your weapons cannot harm us. Your shields cannot protect you." "Then why offer terms at all?" Miller asked. "Why not simply attack?" "Efficiency," Zell replied simply. "Intact infrastructure is more valuable than rubble. Willing servants are more productive than slaves." Miller studied the display, memorizing the fleet positions. "And if we refuse?" "Then your species will learn a harsh lesson about defying the Vorn Empire." Back on the horizon, Miller reported what he had learned to Jack and his team. 2 days, Reed repeated. "That's all the time we have." Jack nodded. "The modifications are almost complete. We've adjusted the railguns and missile guidance systems to work with the sync module." "Will it be enough?" Miller asked. "It has to be," Jack replied. "The entire Earth fleet is being retrofitted as we speak, but they won't be ready in time to help the outer colonies. We're looking at a fighting retreat at best." Miller turned to the tactical display. "Then we need to test the system immediately. If it works, we can transmit the final calibrations to Earth." "Test it how?" Dr. Park asked. "We can't just fire on the Vorn ship." "No," Miller agreed. "But there's a smaller vessel, one of their scouts, patrolling the asteroid belt nearby. If we can disable it without alerting the main fleet." Reed nodded slowly. "A quick strike. Get in, confirm the system works, get out." "Exactly," Miller said. "But we need to make it look like an accident. Something that wouldn't raise suspicions." Jack thought for a moment. "What about a mining explosion? The asteroid belt has several human mining operations. If we lure the scout near one, we could detonate some charges," Reed finished. "Make it seem like a mining accident caught their ship in the blast. And test our weapons in the confusion." Miller agreed. "It's risky, but it's our best option." 6 hours later, the Horizon was in position near a human mining outpost in the asteroid belt. The small crew of miners had been evacuated after being briefed on the importance of their mission. "Vorn scout approaching," Marcus reported from his station. "They're scanning the mining facility." "As expected," Miller said. "They're curious about our operations. Status of the sync module?" Reed checked his readings. "Online and functioning. It's already analyzing their shield patterns." "Good," Miller said. "Begin the countdown for the mining charges." The bridge crew watched tensely as the Vorn scout moved closer to the mining facility, its sensors probing the human operation. Detonation. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Reed counted down. A series of explosions rippled through the asteroid, sending chunks of rock and dust into space. The Vorn scout was caught in the cloud, momentarily disoriented. "Now," Miller ordered. The Horizon's main railgun fired. The projectile streaked through space, its timing perfectly synchronized with the Vorn shield fluctuation. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then a flash of light erupted from the Vorn scout as the railgun round penetrated its shield and struck the hull. "Direct hit," Reed exclaimed. "Shield penetration confirmed." The Vorn vessel listed to one side, trailing debris and venting atmosphere. "It worked," Jack whispered, his eyes wide. "It actually worked." Miller allowed himself a small smile. "Transmit the data to Earth Command immediately. Then let's get out of here before they realize this wasn't an accident." As the Horizon turned away from the disabled Vorn scout, Miller knew they had just changed the course of the coming war. The Vorn believed their shields made them invincible. They had mocked human weapons as primitive and useless, but they hadn't counted on human ingenuity or the importance of a single fleeting moment. Aliens mocked human weapons until the moment past might for. The turning point news of the successful test spread through the human fleet like wildfire. Within hours, ships across the solar system were being fitted with sync modules based on the Horizon's design. But time was running out. "The Vorn are moving," Marcus announced from his station on the bridge. The viewscreen showed dozens of enemy vessels advancing toward the human colony on New Terra, the most populated outpost beyond Earth. Captain Miller studied the tactical display grimly. "How many of our ships have been upgraded with the syncs modules?" "About 60% of the fleet," Reed replied. "The rest are still being modified." Jack Wilson entered the bridge, his face showing signs of exhaustion after working non-stop for the past day. "Earth Command has sent new orders. We're to join the defense of New Terra." Miller nodded. "How many civilians on the colony?" "Nearly 5 million, Dr. Park said quietly. The weight of responsibility settled on Miller's shoulders. 5 million. Lives depended on whether their new weapon would work against the main Vorn fleet. "Set course for New Terra," he ordered. "Maximum speed." The Horizon arrived at New Terra 12 hours later, joining a hastily assembled defense fleet of 30 human vessels. The planet loomed large in the view screen, its surface dotted with the lights of human settlements. Admiral Parker's flagship, the Defender, was coordinating the defense. Miller and Jack transferred over for a final strategy meeting. "Our intel suggests the Vorn will attack within the next 6 hours, Admiral Parker explained, addressing the gathered ship captains. "They've assembled a fleet of 50 warships." "We're outnumbered," one of the captains pointed out. "Yes," Parker agreed. "But thanks to Captain Miller and Ambassador Wilson, we have a weapon that can penetrate their shields." He brought up a display showing the sync module design. "Every ship has been fitted with this technology. It analyzes the enemy shield pattern and fires precisely when their shields flicker." "Will it work against their entire fleet?" another captain asked. Jack stepped forward. "Each Vorn ship has a slightly different shield frequency, so your targeting systems will need time to adjust to each vessel. Focus fire on one ship at a time when possible." Admiral Parker continued. "We've also discovered something else." He zoomed in on a schematic of a Vorn vessel. Their internal scans show minimal armor plating. They've relied so heavily on their shields that their hulls are relatively vulnerable. Miller saw hope flicker across the faces of the assembled officers. The Vorn weren't invincible after all. "One more thing," Parker added. "Earth Command has authorized the use of our experimental EMP warheads. If the sync modules work as expected, these should be devastating against Vorn systems once we get past their shields." The meeting concluded with final assignments. The Horizon would join the front line of defense, putting their tested sync module directly against the Vorn. As Miller prepared to return to his ship, Admiral Parker pulled him aside. "Tom," he said quietly, using Miller's first name, "if this doesn't work—" "It will work," Miller replied firmly. Parker nodded. "But if it doesn't, the Defender will stay behind to cover the evacuation ships, you understand?" Miller understood perfectly. If the battle turned against them, Parker would sacrifice himself and his crew to save as many civilians as possible. "Let's make sure it doesn't come to that," Miller said. The Vorn fleet arrived exactly as predicted, appearing at the edge of the system in perfect formation. Commander Zell's massive flagship led the way, its purple hull gleaming against the darkness of space. "All ships battle positions," Admiral Parker's voice came through the comm system. "Remember your training. Hold fire until you have a lock with the sync module." The human fleet spread out in a defensive screen around New Terra. On the Horizon's bridge, tension was thick in the air as the crew prepared for battle. "Sync module online," Reed reported. "Targeting systems locked on the lead Vorn vessel." "All weapons standing by," Marcus added. Miller took a deep breath. "Open a channel to all human ships. When the channel was open, he spoke clearly and confidently. "This is Captain Miller. Whatever happens today, remember that we are fighting for our homes, our families, and our future. The Vorn think their technology makes them unbeatable. Let's show them what humans can do when pushed too far." A chorus of acknowledgments came from the other ships. Even Admiral Parker gave a solemn, "Well said, Captain." The Vorn fleet continued its advance, seemingly unconcerned by the human defenders. "They're in range," Reed announced. "Hold fire," Miller ordered. "Let them make the first move." They didn't have to wait long. The Vorn ships opened fire, sending purple energy beams slicing through space toward the human fleet. Several ships took direct hits, their shields flaring as they absorbed the impact. "Now," Admiral Parker commanded, "all ships fire at will." The Horizon's railguns roared to life, launching projectiles at precisely calculated intervals. Around them, the rest of the human fleet did the same, filling space with a barrage of missiles and railgun fire. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. The Vorn shields shimmered as they had during the demonstration days earlier. But then something changed. One of the smaller Vorn ships suddenly erupted in a series of explosions as multiple human weapons penetrated its shields at the exact moment of vulnerability. The vessel listed to one side, venting atmosphere and debris. "It's working!" Reed shouted. "Shield penetration confirmed." The Vorn fleet faltered, clearly surprised by the effectiveness of the human weapons, but they quickly regrouped and continued their attack. "They're adjusting their formations," Marcus reported, "spreading out to make targeting more difficult." Miller nodded. "Admiral Parker, suggest we focus fire on their flagship." "Agreed," Parker replied. "All ships target the Vorn command vessel. Coordinate firing solutions through the defender." The battle intensified as both fleets maneuvered for position. Human ships took damage, but for the first time, they were inflicting serious harm on the Vorn as well. The Horizon shuddered as it took a direct hit. "Shields at 60%, Marcus called out. "Stay on target," Miller ordered. "Reed, what's the status of the flagship targeting?" "Sync module has locked onto their pattern," Reed replied. "Firing solution ready in 3, 2, 1, firing!" The Horizon's main railgun fired, joined by concentrated fire from a dozen other human ships. The massive projectiles streaked toward the Vorn flagship, timed to hit precisely during the ear shield gap. The impacts were devastating. Multiple explosions blossomed across the Vorn flagship's hull as the human weapons found their mark. "Direct hits!" Reed exclaimed. "Their main power systems are fluctuating." On the view screen, Miller watched as Commander Zell's mighty vessel began to list to one side, secondary explosions rippling along its length. "The rest of the Vorn fleet is falling back," Marcus reported with disbelief in his voice. "They're retreating." A cheer went up across the bridge, quickly echoed by the crews of the other human ships, but Miller didn't join in. He kept his eyes on the damaged Vorn flagship. "Get me a direct channel to Commander Zell," he ordered. A moment later, Zell's face appeared on screen. The Vorn commander's usual composure was gone, replaced by shock and anger. "How?" he demanded. "How did you penetrate our shields?" Miller allowed himself a small smile. "There's an old human saying, Commander, pride comes before a fall. You were so confident in your technology that you never considered its flaws, or perhaps you simply underestimated those you considered primitive." Zell's black eyes narrowed. "This is not over, human." "No," Miller agreed. "But the advantage is no longer yours. The moment when you could have easily defeated us has passed." The connection cut off as the Vorn flagship limped away, joining the retreat of the alien fleet. Admiral Parker's voice came through the comm. "All ships stand down to condition yellow. Maintain defensive positions in case they return." Miller sat back in his command chair, feeling the tension of battle slowly releasing its grip. They had won the day, but the war was far from over. The Vorn had learned a valuable lesson. Never underestimate your enemy, no matter how primitive they might seem. And humanity had learned something too. Sometimes the greatest advantage comes from being underestimated. 3 weeks had passed since the battle at New Terra. The victory had given humanity precious time to prepare for what everyone knew would be a larger conflict. Every ship in the Earth fleet now carried sync modules and ground defenses on all. Colonies had been upgraded with the new technology. Captain Miller stood on the observation deck of Earth's orbital defense station, looking down at the blue planet below. Admiral Parker and Jack Wilson joined him, both looking tired but determined. "The Vorn have gone silent," Parker said, handing Miller a data tablet. "No movements, no communications for almost 2 weeks." Miller reviewed the report. "They're regrouping, planning." Jack nodded. "Our intelligence suggests they've called for reinforcements from the core of their empire. They're not giving up." "Would you?" Miller asked. "If you believed you ruled the stars, would one defeat make you surrender?" "No," Parker admitted, "but it gives us time." "Time for what?" Miller asked. Jack smiled. "Time for this." He activated a holographic display showing a new weapon design. "We're calling it the phase cannon. It's designed to create an artificial shield gap in Vorn vessels rather than just waiting for the natural fluctuation." Miller studied the design with interest. "You're forcing the shields to cycle?" "Exactly," Jack confirmed. "Instead of waiting for the 0.006-second gap every 4.3 seconds, we can create a gap on demand." "How soon until it's ready?" Parker asked. "The prototype is already installed on the horizon," Jack replied. "We can begin testing tomorrow." Miller was about to respond when an urgent alert sounded throughout the station. The 3 men rushed to the command center where officers were scrambling to monitor stations. "Report," Parker demanded. "Sir, we're detecting massive spatial distortions at the edge of our solar system," a sensor officer replied. "Energy signatures match Vorn technology, but on a scale we haven't seen before." The main screen showed a swirling vortex of energy forming near Pluto's orbit. It was far larger than any portal the Vorn had created previously. "How many ships?" Miller asked, dreading the answer. "Unknown, sir," the officer replied. "But the energy reading suggests hundreds." Parker's face paled. "They're bringing their entire fleet." Commander Zell stood on the bridge of his new flagship watching as the great portal stabilized. The defeat at New Terra had cost him his previous vessel and the respect of many in the Vorn High Command. But he had convinced them to grant him one final chance to conquer the human system. "The portal is stable, Commander," his second-in-command reported. "The main fleet is beginning transit." Zell nodded. "And the modifications to our shields?" "Complete, Commander. The shield cycling has been adjusted to a random pattern. The humans will no longer be able to predict the momentary gaps." Zell felt satisfaction flow through him. The humans had been clever, discovering the one weakness in Vorn technology. But the Vorn were not fools. They had learned and adapted. "Prepare all ships for the final assault," Zell ordered. "This time we will show no mercy." Back on Earth, the Defense Council had assembled in emergency session. Representatives from all colonies joined via holographic projection as Admiral Parker outlined the situation. "The Vorn are returning with a force far larger than anything we've faced before," he explained. "Our estimates suggest at least 300 warships." A murmur of dismay ran through the assembly. "What about the sync modules?" a colony representative asked. "Will they still be effective?" Jack stepped forward. "We believe the Vorn will have modified their shield technology to counter our advantage. The natural gaps will likely be randomized, making our current timing systems ineffective." "Then we've lost our only edge," someone said. "Not necessarily," Miller interjected. "Ambassador Wilson's team has developed a new weapon that might give us a fighting chance." Jack quickly explained the phase cannon concept. "But," he concluded, "we only have one prototype, and it's untested." Admiral Parker straightened his uniform. "Then we test it now. Captain Miller, take the horizon and locate a Vorn scout. Confirm whether the phase cannon works against their modified shields." Miller nodded. "And if it does, then we'll have a production miracle to perform," Parker replied grimly. "We need to outfit as many ships as possible before the main Vorn fleet arrives." "How long do we have?" asked a colony representative. Parker studied the sensor data. "At their current rate of deployment, 4 days at most." The horizon moved silently through the outer reaches of the solar system, its sensors searching for foreign scout ships. Lieutenant Reed and Jack Wilson were making final adjustments to the phase cannon in the weapons bay. "There," Reed said, making a small calibration. "The targeting system is integrated with the main computer. It should be able to analyze and disrupt any shield pattern, even randomized ones." Jack ran a final diagnostic. "Power levels are stable. We're as ready as we'll ever be." Miller's voice came through the comm system. "We've located a Vorn scout near Europa. Battle stations." The horizon approached the Vorn vessel cautiously. The alien ship was smaller than a destroyer, but still formidable, its purple hull gleaming in the dim light of distant Jupiter. "They've spotted us," Marcus reported from the bridge. "They're powering weapons." "Hold position," Miller ordered. "Reed, is the phase cannon ready?" "Yes, sir," Reed replied from the weapons bay. "Targeting solution locked." Miller took a deep breath. "Fire." The phase cannon emitted a beam of pulsing blue energy that struck the Vorn scout. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the scout's shields flickered visibly, ripples of energy cascading across its surface. "Shield disruption confirmed." Reed called out, "We've created a 30-second gap in their defenses." "All weapons fire," Miller commanded. The Horizon's conventional weapons launched in a coordinated barrage. Without their shields, the Vorn vessel was defenseless. The alien ship broke apart under the assault, secondary explosions ripping through its hull. "It worked," Jack said, his voice filled with wonder and relief. It actually worked. Miller allowed himself a brief moment of celebration before reality set in. "Set course for Earth, maximum speed. We need to get this technology into production immediately." 4 days later, the combined Earth fleet assembled in high orbit. Only 50 ships had been equipped with the new phase cannons, but each could create shield gaps for the rest of the fleet to exploit. The defense stations around Earth and its colonies had also been modified, their powerful fixed cannons now capable of disrupting Vorn shields at long range. It wasn't enough, Miller knew. Not against 300 Vorn warships, but it was all they had. "All ships, battle formation," Admiral Parker ordered from the Defender. "Phase cannon vessels, take your assigned positions." The Horizon moved into place at the front of the formation. On the bridge, Miller addressed his crew one last time. "Whatever happens today, remember that we've already done what the Vorn thought impossible. We found a flaw in their perfect defense. We showed them that technology alone doesn't determine victory." He looked around at the determined faces watching him. "It's ingenuity, adaptability, and courage that win wars, and those are qualities humanity has in abundance." A signal chimed, and Marcus looked up from his station. "Sir, the Vorn fleet has entered Earth orbit. They're broadcasting on all frequencies." "Put it through," Miller ordered. Commander Zell's face appeared on the main screen. He looked different, harder, more determined, but also somehow diminished. "Attention, humans," Zell began. "Your moment of defiance is at an end. You surprised us once with your primitive weapons. It will not happen again." Miller opened a channel to respond. "Commander Zell, before you launch this attack, consider what happened at New Terra. Consider what it means that a primitive species found a way to defeat your supposedly perfect technology." "It means nothing," Zell replied coldly. "A temporary setback. A moment that has passed." Miller nodded slowly. "Yes, a moment passed. But here's what you don't understand, Commander. Humans live for moments. We seize them, we learn from them, and we create new ones." He signaled to Reed, who activated the phase cannon. "The moment hasn't passed, Commander," Miller said. "It's just beginning." As the human fleet moved forward to meet the Vorn armada, Miller knew that regardless of the outcome, humanity had already won an important victory. They had proven that even the most advanced civilization could be humbled by those they considered beneath them. The Vorn had mocked human weapons until the moment passed, the moment when their shields flickered and failed, the moment when their arrogance blinded them to their own weaknesses, the moment when they learned that true strength comes not from technology alone, but from the will to survive against all odds. It was a lesson that would echo across the stars for generations to come.